Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about ASC 606 Step 2, Identify a Performance Obligation. And I'm just going to try to get through this real quick and give you a big overview, and then maybe in future videos, if you like this, I can dive into concepts. So if you leave comments or subscribe and leave some questions for me, I can dive into some more detailed material. But really with this concept, the way that I like to think about it is when you're invoicing your customer. So if you have a business invoicing a customer, you generally are selling specific products and services. So for an accounting firm, it could be pretty simple. You could just have your services of a person building an hourly rate. Or if you have a simple product like you're selling a bicycle, you're just selling the bike. So that's a pretty easy way to determine what your performance obligation is, right? If you're selling a very simple product, it's essentially you have to think of these two concepts. Is the product capable of being distinct? And is it distinct in the context of the contract? So we're saying capable of being distinct. For selling a bicycle, is it capable of being distinct? Well, the bicycle is unique, right? It has all these other concepts though. It has wheels, it has brakes, and you could ask, why don't you consider each of those underlying components a performance obligation? And so that's where you get a little complex. And the way that you should think about it is, are those each individual products, like the brakes and the wheels, are those independent? Like, are they independently valuable? Or to combine, do they create a transformative product? And most of the time, you're going to conclude a bicycle is a transformative product when compared to the underlying wheels and the brakes, right? Like, most people can't just go build a bicycle with all these other components. They've been combined to create this new product called a bicycle. And so it seems simple on the face of it, right? Like, we're just selling a bicycle, but we have to do that assessment if the underlying components are capable of being distinct, each of those, and distinct in the context of the contract. And that's the question: are you buying all of these separate parts? Or are you buying a bicycle? And the contract should stipulate essentially what you're buying. So this is where it can get much more complex as you start layering on additional services. So, like in software companies and SaaS-based products, so software as a service, we get a lot more complicated concepts of, well, we might buy a product, but that product, like we're buying a software license, but that software license also includes the ability to talk to a customer representative. So some kind of support element to the contract. And when you have this support element to the contract, you have to assess, well, is that capable of being distinct? And is it distinct in the context of a contract? And does it have a transformative nature? Are they combined to create something unique? Or if they're not, then we have to allocate them separately. And most of the time you can honestly, you can offshore some of your service costs as a software company. You're not doing anything special. You're having some tech expert essentially help the customer. And so that's where you have to bifurcate these two concepts of, well, we have our support for our software, and we also are selling the software itself. And so those would be two elements in a contract that will eventually need to be allocated to. And so when we're assessing a contract, or when you're starting to think through ASC 606, you want to also identify if there's performance obligations in your contracts that aren't necessarily in the invoice. And that's where this can get really tricky, right? You want to see, well, maybe your invoice just says, hey, we're charging $500 for this specific software product. Well, are we also giving support elements in that software product? Well, then some of that $500, that's called the transaction price, which we'll talk about in a little bit in a future series, has to be allocated to those underlying performance obligations. So we'd have some of it go to the software element, and then some go to the support element. And this can get more complicated if in our contract we have other concepts, like something called a material right. And so material right is if we're giving a promise to a customer for a future looking discount or credit that is significantly lower than other customers of similar customer class. And so the idea here would be, if imagine you're selling shoes. And so I'm selling shoes to a customer, but I'm telling them at the same time, hey, listen, these shoes are normally $50 a pair, but I'm going to give you a coupon, and that coupon will let you buy 100 shoes at $1 a pair. Well, $1 a pair is so much lower than $50 a pair. That's such a significant discount that we'd have to consider that a performance obligation, because it's capable of being distinct, and it's also distinct in the context of a contract. And so we would have to allocate some value to that, because we're essentially have the performance obligation of giving this significant discount to the customer in the future. And this allows us to make sure that we're recognizing revenue along with the standard revenue and accounting policies, like the matching principle, where revenue should be recognized in the period where it's earned, and then the expense recognition principle, or the matching principle for the expense recognition component, where we should be matching expenses with the revenues they help generate. And so when we have a material right, it helps us so we're not accelerating revenue recognition inappropriately, and we're actually recognizing revenue in a later period. And so these are just some high-level concepts of performance obligations that I think you'd find helpful if you're exploring the concept of ASC 606. So if you have more questions, feel free to leave comments. Please subscribe, and I'll do some more of these videos if you find them helpful. Thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye.